Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back once again to On Track GP. We're here because this evening just finished off the third and final day of pre-season testing in Bahrain. Cars back on track at last. We have Jamie here with me this evening. Should I say not today, it's this evening. Getting dark outside, Jamie, but how are you anyway?
The time's all blending into one, Coylin. I'm doing well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. The testing has taken it out of me the last few days.
I can imagine. And trying to keep track of all those carbon fiber cars that look exactly the same is no easy task.
No, it's not easy, but we'll try our best. So let's kick off with the very first day. We had the first day of running on Wednesday in Bahrain at the Sakir International Circuit, and the first thing to kick off in the morning session, actually, a lot of the teams were all using the aero rakes, probably just to get a normal kind of understanding of how their cars are working for the first time on track. And the majority of teams seem to be working okay, apart from one team, which was Williams. Alex Albon had a fuel pump issue at the start in the morning, and then Logan Sargent, after his wild excursion off the track at turn 10, actually ended up retiring from the end of the day with a drive shaft failure, should I say. So apart from Williams, all the other teams seem to be looking okay. But in general, is this a worrying start for Williams, do you think?
It's not the most impressive start. I mean, it was obvious that all teams were going to go and get their aero data as soon as possible because the analysis is going to go from there. I mean, the amount of aero paint that's been used over the last 3 days is ridiculous anyway. But yeah, to get the aero rakes on the cars and to get that initial data was huge. It was interesting that both 3 of the top teams had single driver runs, which I thought was big. But talking specifically about Williams, worrying start because there was a lot of big talk during the preseason of not just how many sponsors they have, but the fact that potentially they would start competing more towards the top of the midfield. Logan Sargent, hopefully this doesn't become a recurring theme for him. He looks solid in the opening laps where he was starting to get his feet in, but as soon as he started pushing it and started to find those limits, he then found the paint, he found the curb, he found as many different spinning locations I thought was possible in Bahrain. And I'm gutted for Albon as well. I thought he came into this with a lot of promise, and that might have dented his confidence somewhat because he is very much in the shop window this season for 3 or 4 different teams.
Yeah, definitely 100%. There's going to be a lot of people looking at Albon this year, I think. Even though he's contracted to the end of 2025 at Williams, contract's only a piece of paper at the end of the day. But Logan Sargent, yeah, I mean, I was looking at him particularly through the first day and halfway through yesterday, and I was just watching him. He's going off track and he's kind of making mistakes and locking brakes, and kind of like, this is meant to be Sargent 2.0. You're not really showing yourself here.
Yeah, well, that was my thought process. Is you've had your rookie season where the mistakes can be expected and the mistakes can be written off, but you've got to come into this season, and even if you're pushing it close to the limit, you've really got to have a handle on that car. And there's no sort of saying, oh, this car's designed by Alex Albon. They're 2 very similar driving styles. I wouldn't say that either of them are like polar opposites, like with Perez and Verstappen, or with Russell and Hamilton. We're not seeing a preference towards the front or the back of the car between the 2 Williams drivers. So with that in mind, I'm quite surprised at the borderline disappointing outing by Sargent, and potentially this is another example of too much pressure on a driver, and he maybe needs to take the pressure off himself, especially going into this first Grand Prix, to actually come out a little bit better, because I mean their times across the 3 days aren't that bad. And in all honesty, I thought Logan Sargent was a better showing than, I think it was 11th average. So for me, I think he can do a lot better than that. But I'm disappointed for Albon for sure.
We'll only have to wait a week to see how they do under race conditions. But we'll move it on to the second day, of course. Kind of normal running for all the teams during the second day. A bit of an issue for Sergio Perez with overheating brakes in the afternoon. But the main talking point from Tuesday was, and I can't really understand how this works, is the drain cover came up at turn 10. Now, you had Lewis Hamilton come over and pull it up, and then a lap later, Charles Leclerc came over and destroyed his floor off it. Now, Jamie, for a circuit that like Bahrain, where there's, especially in the last few years, where there's been countless and countless laps, testing, qualifying the race. How does this happen?
Now, I don't think this is necessarily a fault of the circuit. I think this is aerodynamic developments and also ground effect plus lateral movement of the car, which is causing these problems. And as much as preseason is about the cars, it's also about the tracks and how the cars are going to affect the tracks. So it's better to see this now and to see these issues happen now than it is to get into an FP1 and destroy a car like Vegas. In saying that, it does raise questions about the maintenance of the tracks and whether things are checked as well as they should be. I know from watching Ted Gravitz talk about the way that the drain cover was secured, it's very small screws put into a concrete siding between the channels of the slate, should we call it, the metal grill over the top. So it only takes the lateral movement of the tire to pull that out, and then that's going to lift up. I would say this is more to do with the development of the cars and creating a very strong aerodynamic vacuum underneath the car. And it's another example of how ground effect, we don't always have all the answers when we get into first round of testing. In saying that, I think this may come down to FIA and not checking that everything was secure before. I mean, a couple of grid walks would have gone a long way to checking these things. Turn 10, turn 11, they're big corners, and they're a big part of Bahrain as well. So I'm quite surprised with sort of centerpiece areas of the track like that there hasn't been better checks done. But I'm glad that this happened now rather than day 2 of Grand Prix.
Yeah, definitely 100%. The only concern I'd have going forward is, of course, that it didn't just happen once; it happened twice. It happened this morning as well with Sergio Perez. A couple of years ago, I remember there was an incident, I'm sure you remember, in Malaysia with Romain Grosjean, where the drain cover came up and his Haas hit it, and it actually sent him off the circuit, and quite a sizable accident, destroyed the car. So, do you think there's any worry that this could be a potential problem come next week when the cars are actually racing around there, or will the FIA look after it?
I think it's possible this could be a recurring thing for the season, and I'm not sort of a naysaying or necessarily sort of doomsaying for what could happen this season, but it is something that we're going to have to check at every track now. Especially, we already had the issue with Vegas, and you just brought up Romain Grosjean's crash, which was big as well. So, from an outside perspective, looking in terms of what the FIA needs to do, this needs to be checked for every drain cover for every Grand Prix now. Otherwise, and we don't know when, because tracks, generally speaking, we get a lot of shakedown time on a track designed purely for racing, as opposed to having bit parts where some of it is track, some of it is only used as track partway through of the year. For instance, we've got certain tracks that are only built 3 days before the Grand Prix get there. So it's going to be a big ask for everyone to check drain covers and manhole covers and all this sort of stuff, because the ground effect may be that much more improved this year that it is going to be a potential, if you excuse the pun, a potential speed bump going into the season.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like I mentioned there just a moment ago, of course, we had issues as well with that particular drain cover this morning. But apart from that, today's was normal, apart from a little bit of an issue for, I think, who was it had an issue today? I can't particularly remember. Somebody had an issue and lost laps. But the one thing that stood out for me today was Haas. Now, I know they finished down the order in terms of the time when the checker flag fell, but for most of the day, they were kind of up there in the top 10, in and around the top 10. And it was like for the last 2 days, they came out and said, well, we're focusing on just trying to figure out our tires and make sure we can eradicate the problem we've had with the last 2 or 3 cars. But this year they've kind of really went for it, and they look okay. They don't look amazing, but they look okay.
I think Eo Komatsu is certainly downplaying it, and he downplays it pretty much in every interview he does now, essentially saying the F24 is not competitive. But seeing that outing today, it does look like, and we won't see because using C3, C4, C5, and every I think only Danny Ricciardo, apart from George Russell, performed particularly well on the harder tire, on the harder compound anyway. But it does seem like Haas aren't going to eat the tyres as badly this year. So that should help, given that you've got one lap specialists in Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. They can put the car higher up the grid order come qualifying. So hopefully I personally think, and this sort of goes for most of the teams, bar maybe Red Bull and Ferrari, everyone's holding something back. Like I said, I think Haas are being a little bit humble and a little bit quiet early doors, because I think they want to come out kicking ahead of Sauber, Williams, and Alpine, and potentially RB. And just holding that little bit of development back. And I think that goes for a lot of the midfield as well, and even as far up as Aston Martin.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm going to take some cues from Ted Kravitz here, and I'm going to read out my notebook, a couple of comments from the drivers throughout the last few days. The general consensus, first of all, I gathered from across the teams and the drivers over the past few days, is that every team has made a step up this year, be it Red Bull or be it Haas. Everybody's made a step forward. And just some of the comments I have here is, so Charles Leclerc is first. He said that the Ferrari SF24 is a car that's finally doing what they wanted to do. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell have noted how the W15 is much nicer to drive than last year's car. Daniel Ricciardo said how he feels RB can challenge at the top half of the midfield this year with the V-Carbo one. And of course, if you watch it, it seemed very, very planted all weekend throughout the circuit. And McLaren are feeling very positive as well. Of course, Andrea Stella saying that the car definitely has made some positive steps this season. So just out of curiosity, anybody that really stood out to you over the last few days that kind of just said, yes, this has made a real go forward?
My biggest problem I've got with most of what the quotes that you've just said is that every team has made developments. And the problem with that is that no one's going to leap or frog leap anyone else in the pecking order. Like, yeah. If Haas have made the same amount of development as Sauber, as Williams, as RB, then no one's made any development technically. What I do hope is that that's not the case. And although RB are setting like the benchmark for what we're doing this season, hopefully it's a case of they haven't progressed that much further and everyone else is going to be concertinaing up to join them. I'm very excited about Mercedes. I say that as a Red Bull fan, mostly because I think they're on the right track with this. It didn't on the straights. The W15 doesn't look like it's porpoising as much. Certainly from, I mean, Bahrain's not exactly the track to look at for porpoising, but it certainly looked like a much better package all round. I'm keen to hear what Andrea Stella has to say come mid-season and how much they've actually held back on development, and whether they do exactly the same as they did last year at McLaren and have a car that starts the first half of the season and then a car that is developed for the second half, or whether they go out early doors and really take it to Red Bull from the start. The other person who I'm really sort of gunning for to show how, well, two actually, to show how good they're going to be this season is Russell and Sainz, for completely different reasons. Russell, because he will be gunning for that Mercedes #1 seat, and I'm not going to use the phrase that I used on pretty much every single video for the last week, but it will be a much bigger challenge for Russell, and to take that challenge to Hamilton as well, and take the fight. And for Sainz is now very much in the shop window, and he'll be in the shop window for most of the front runners, I would argue, this season. I'm outspoken when I say that Sainz, he'll be on Red Bull's radar as a potential replacement should Sergio Perez not perform the way they want him to, or even the fact that they think Sergio Perez might already be out the door. And that works conversely for Sergio, because he has everything to prove this year in that car, because it does look like the RB20 is going to be the car to beat again, even though Ferrari looked very good today.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good point you made there about Sainz and Red Bull. It reminded me of a photo I seen over the past week of you probably seen it yourself across social media, Carlos Sainz Sr. with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko sitting down to have a conversation with them in the paddock.
Strangely convenient, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It might not mean anything, but given the current time, you never know. But Red Bull, yeah, of course. I mean, it's obvious. They seem like they're the clear favourite to continue what they did last year. You know, Charles Leclerc has been saying that they're still the benchmark. And Fernando Alonso, ever the guy for a cheeky comment, came out and said during the week that he thinks that there's 19 drivers already know who's going to win the championship. So,
that's strangely pessimistic for Alonso, which it was a surprising comment to make. I will remember to talk about Lance Stroll in a second as well, because I was actually pleasantly surprised as a Stroll apologist. But that for me was huge in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, because silly season has pretty much started. Hamilton has kicked off silly season already for Formula One. So this is going to happen throughout the season, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities for the teams around specific drivers. And by that, I mean management, family, etc., that are going to be doing a lot of talking behind the scenes. And especially when it comes to Checo, Carlos Sainz, these drivers, Alex Albon, these drivers are in the shop window for big seats still, even because Sergio Perez isn't going to be going to VCARB. He's not going to be going to Sauber. He's very much in the shop window as a top driver of the top elite drivers. And the same goes for Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz isn't going to settle for sitting in Sauber, Haas, Williams. He will be looking, can he get in at Red Bull, Mercedes, and see where he can go from there.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. You know, in terms of Sergio Perez, you know, we talk often about how he might be leaving Red Bull this year, but you know, the initial thought from him as well was that apart from the issue yesterday, he seemed to be going all right. He seems to be enjoying the car. He's confident. But the one thing he's not confident in, and I suppose he's not going to come out and say that, oh yeah, we're miles ahead of everyone else, but he thinks that the grid's going to be a lot closer to Red Bull this year. Given Red Bull's performance, though, I think he's talking through his teeth a little bit.
I think so too. I think he has to play down certain aspects of it. Interestingly, Max Verstappen hasn't said much about anything, which I think that says a lot, because he is genuinely letting the car do the talking. It looked to me, day one, Max had a lot of the settings turned up to near performance, like sort of top end performance level. And then they sort of tailored off as the testing carried on through the day. That was very much in contrast to Ferrari, who seemed to do the opposite and had settings turned down day one, day two, and then really went for it today. Especially when you look at the times from Sainz and Leclerc, they seem to sort of concertina up. But in terms of Perez saying about the grid being closer, I'm not convinced, because like we discussed towards the end of last season, I think Red Bull, it might not be 6 months, but they may be 3-4 months ahead in terms of development. And there's been a lot of memes and a lot of jokes made that Adrian Newey looked at the Mercedes W14, fixed it, and called it the RB20. And
fix that.
Looking at it, there were some great angles from testing today. And if we were to look at a Formula One car dead on, you're never going to see what Adrian Newey's done with the aerodynamics, but the hidden ventilation that he's got either side of the cockpit, that's a big shout, and not something that's been mimicked by any of the other teams. So having that vertical slit, which is much more pronounced than it was last year, on top of their changes to the Venturi tunnels, that's huge. And the RB20, for me, I think they've shaved time off. And the fact that they don't need to have a carbon fiber car and they can actually put paint on their car means that they've got time and they've got weight to spare, as opposed to what I was expecting, which would have been a yellow, a blue, and a red line, and that was it. Everything else was carbon fiber. And also the nose cone. I realize I'm rambling at this point, but I thought that was a bluff towards just after the launch. I thought, no, we're going to see something different there. And so far in this testing, that nose cone has stayed the same. And it is markedly different, very much in a different way to what the W15 nose cone and front wing looks like. The RB20 looks different, and it looks like that is actually helping their aerodynamic package. So like I say, I think there was some sandbagging from Mercedes, because they're going to hold back just a little bit. McLaren potentially haven't shown their entire card, but I think Ferrari and Red Bull went, right, this is laying out our shop ready to go come the start of the season and first qualifying.
I have to say you're scaring me with the thoughts of a car that's going to be faster than the RB19. But anyway, let's wait and see. And of course, we only have a week to wait and see. The first race weekend coming up and be on their way. Actually, this time next week we'll be over qualifying, which makes it seem ridiculously close. But yeah, so thank you very much for joining us once again here on Track GP. Make sure you come back and join us throughout the week for all things Bahrain Grand Prix. We're going to have our podcast on Monday. We're going to have our preview on Wednesday this time, not Thursday as the usual time, Wednesday, because the race on Saturday, of course. And then we're going to have our usual watch along and usual stuff as well. Make sure you tune in on Tuesdays for Robbie's Racing Line as well and hear what Robbie has to say about the current F1 grid. Well, Jamie, thank you very much for joining me once again.
Cheers,
I hope you enjoyed the first race weekend. I'm sure we'll be talking beforehand, but if not, I hope you enjoy it.
Yep, no, super looking forward to it. And it'll be interesting to see whose predictions come true on this one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's wait and see. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us, and we'll see you very soon. See you later.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.